Evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. I'll ask Commissioner Keldorf to now lead us all in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Michelle. Can we have roll call, please?
Chair Baldino.
Here.
Vice Chair Newman.
Present.
Commissioner Keldorf.
Here.
Commissioner Wingate.
Present.
Commissioner Heschler.
I'm here. All right, now's the time on the agenda for public communications. Anyone wishing to address the commission on anything not on the agenda can do so at this time. All right, seeing no one, we'll close public communications. Nothing on the consent calendar. Written communications. We've been provided with the written communications that have been received as to item H1, correct?
That's correct. Everything that you've received on the dais is for H1.
All right, thank you. Okay, that brings us to our first and only new business item, H1. It's a EA 1201 Beach Cities Media Campus review of the draft environmental impact report. Before we have a report, Commissioner Keldorf, you had something you wanted to talk about?
I did. I wanted to ask the other commissioners their thoughts on continuing this to our next Planning Commission meeting, just in light of the attorney letter we received from SAFER. And I think our packet was sent out on Tuesday, maybe Monday, Tuesday. And so I don't know that I've had enough time to go through it, but if I am alone in that, I'm open to having the conversation. Wanted to get your thoughts.
Not an unreasonable request. It was a lot of information to go through.
I will concur with you. However, I'm wondering if we did have the staff report and discussions and questions, and along the way those were developed, if there would be enough information at the end of it that perhaps if we still felt that it wasn't adequate information, we could continue it. Do you think that it's worth going through?
I do. I mean, I think this is big enough that it might take a couple of times to hear it, so I could see that as well. I'm definitely open to that. I just want to be cognizant of everybody else's time in the process.
No, I'll agree with you.
All right, well, I think we have a motion to continue. Is there any discussion on the other feelings of commissioners?
If we do that, if we continue, does that mean we stop now? Or
I would rather, if the commission wants to continue to review the information, then I'd rather forego the entire presentation now. Let us review it so that when we get the presentation, we have questions. I would hate for them to do a presentation only to have to come back if we're going to continue it. Those are my thoughts. It's more expedient if the commission wants to continue it to review the documents, that's totally fine. We can take a vote and do that. I just would rather do it before the presentation is done. We have a room full of consultants. And if you want to dig into this to really get down to the nitty-gritty, that's great. I applaud that effort. I just don't want to have to do the presentation twice.
I don't think it would be two presentations, would it? It would just be bringing it back with...
It'll be, all the consultants will have to come back a second time.
They would be here to perhaps answer questions at this time? Or are you just saying not go through it? Part of the learning process, I think, will be going through and hearing and asking questions, and that'll be part of the development of the learning process. What do you think? Or would you rather hear it all at another time at a later date after you've read it? Or would you rather interact with some of it now?
Carol, thoughts?
I would like the opportunity to review this information that came to us so recently. It's dated May 21st. I just saw this packet tonight. It'll give the planning department a chance to look at it and respond to it. So I would hate to have all these people do their presentation tonight and respond to comments and then have to come back again in 2 more weeks. Why don't we just do it in 2 weeks when we have a chance to look at this and see what it all means, and give the planning department a chance to look at it and respond as well, if that makes sense.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if I can address that comment very briefly. There should be this responses to comments on the dais. The consultant was able to provide responses to the letter that came in late this, a couple days ago. But ultimately, you are the decision maker. So if you don't feel comfortable making a decision tonight, it's perfectly within your purview to continue it.
Right.
But
So
there was an opportunity to respond.
Jay, what do you think?
I've read it. I can go either way. I mean, I understand we're busy people and don't have a chance to read all the stuff, so I can, I'll go with flow here.
Can I make a suggestion that we take 7 minutes so that we can read the response?
I don't know, Michelle. Are you need more than 7 minutes?
Yeah,
I'm a
probably.
fast reader.
I would, yeah.
I can take 7 minutes to read the response.
And if we read the response now, are we going to proceed? Or if not, then we just do it in 2 weeks?
Well, if the response makes sense, then we might as well proceed.
All right,
Unle-
it sounds like there's enough interest in having the conversation, so I will withdraw my motion and let's have the conversation. Everybody's here. I'm sure they could have been somewhere else, right?
Everybody's
already
gotta
on the
be
clock.
somewhere.
If you'd like, we can recess for 10 minutes.
Sure.
Fine?
Stop.
Okay.
Yep.
We'll be in recess for 10 minutes to allow us to review the new information, and we'll re-adjourn at 5:47.
Thank you.
Meeting back to order. Thank everyone for their patience, and thank you, Commissioner Keldorf, for being concerned enough to try to take the time to read the information. I do appreciate that. So we now are going to address agenda item HE1, which is the new Beach City Media Campus located at 2021 Rosecrans Avenues, and we're discussing the environmental impact report. Can we get a staff report, please?
Good evening, Chair Baldino and fellow commissioners. Thank you. Tonight, for your consideration, is Beach City's Media Campus, which is EA 1201 for general plan amendment and map amendment, zone change and map amendment, development agreement, and environmental impact report. The applicant is Rosecrans Sepulveda Partners 4, LLC, or RSP4, and the general plan and zoning will be mixed-use south. So the location, as you know, is 2021 Rosecrans Avenue, and the site location is here at the south end of El Segundo, bordering the city of Manhattan Beach. And so right to the south of Rosecrans Avenue is Manhattan Beach. To the east of the project is directly east is the Continental, what's that project called? The Continental project, and to the west and northwest are the Point and the Plaza El Segundo, excuse me. Directly north is a vacant lot. So the Beach City's Media Campus will include 313,000 total square feet, which is made up of 240,000 square feet of creative office, 666,000 square feet of studio and production facilities, and 7,000 square feet of retail. It will contain a 7-level parking structure with roughly 980 stalls, and an additional 120 stalls are planned below the creative office building in a semi-subterranean structure. The site is accessed via 2 points off of Rosecrans, one of them to be signalized, as well as another entry point off of Nash through the adjacent property, which accesses off Nash. And the project may include gates for additional security. So the applications will include a general plan amendment and zone change, which will change the land use designation and zoning of the property from commercial center, C4, to urban mixed use south, which is MUS. And with the GPA and zone change, the Beach City Media Campus is consistent with the general plan and zoning ordinance. And here we have graphics indicating the land use map amendment and zoning amendment. There's the site. So just, they would be consistent with the adjacent property to the east. The application also includes a development agreement for a 10-year development agreement, which limits the build-out of the property to 313,000 square feet. It also limits the FAR, floor area ratio, to 1.13, and limits the height to 140 feet. It also prohibits certain uses, including drive-through restaurants, adult businesses, catering services and flight kitchens, freight forwarding, and service stations. The public benefits indicated with the development agreement include fulfilling long-term economic and social goals for the city and community, providing fiscal benefits to the city's general fund in terms of increased employment and utility, business license, property, and other tax revenues, which are anticipated to exceed $390,000 annually. It will provide short-term construction employment and long-term permanent employment within the city. It will eliminate a blighted area. It will facilitate environmental remediation on the property and will create significant off-site improvements, including streets, signals, medians, and landscaping. And finally, the property owner is voluntarily waiving its right to develop the property with certain use which are permitted or conditionally permitted within the MUS zone. The EIR, there were 5 alternatives analyzed in the EIR, and they included no project, reduced project, a mixed-use alternative with studio and production facilities, mixed-use alternative with research and development, and an all-creative office space alternative. Alternative 1, as you see here, this is the mixed-use alternative with studio and production facilities, which would develop the site with up to 2,500 square feet of retail space, up to 100,000 square feet of general office space, and up to 188,000 square feet of studio and production facilities. Alternative 2 is the mixed-use alternative with research and development, which would allow the site to be developed with up to 100,000 square feet of research and development space, up to 10,000 square feet of retail space, and up to 100,040 square feet of creative office space. And finally, alternative 3 is the all creative office space, which would allow the project site to be developed with up to 261,990 square feet of creative office space. So continuing with the CEQA analysis, the city prepared an environmental impact report, and we'll just go into the project impact, the topics where no impact or less than significant impact would occur. And these topics were aesthetics, air quality, geology and soils, land use and planning, noise, public services, and utilities service systems. The topics for which the implementation of mitigation measures would result in less than significant impacts included paleontological resources, archaeological resources, greenhouse gas emissions, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, and tribal cultural resources. And finally, there were items that had significant and unavoidable impacts, and these were population, housing, and employment, and this was limited to cumulative city and regional population and housing demands, and the topic of traffic, or transportation, traffic, and parking, and these were 4 impacts in the existing Plus project and 3 impacts in the future Plus project, and also cumulative construction impacts. And the city will adopt a statement of overriding considerations. There will also be a mitigation monitoring and reporting program, which will be in place throughout all phases of the project, including pre-construction, construction, post-construction, and there will, of course, be descriptions of the implementing party, the enforcement agency, and the monitoring agency. So, in conclusion, the recommendation tonight is to adopt Resolution number 2861, recommending approval of environmental assessment number EA 1201, and also recommend that the City Council approve an amendment, recommend that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council to approve an amendment to the site's general plan and zoning designation from C4 to MUS, approve the development agreement, certify the environmental impact report, and adopt the statement of overriding considerations, and approve the mitigation monitoring and reporting program. Thank you. Oh, in addition, for notes and for the record, there are 2 items for errata, and they include a note on the FEIR. We are going to replace the text on page 1-8 regarding traffic, and its language to clean up and just clarify. No substantive changes. And also in the staff report, it was there was a typo regarding an error regarding multimedia offices being prohibited. They will be permitted. So these will be cleaned up prior to City Council meeting. Thank you.
All right, thank you. You mentioned the applicant Rosecrans Sepulveda Partners LLC, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that is comprised of Mar Ventures and Continental Development Corporation? Yes? Okay. I should have done this before the presentation, but I'll do it now since we're still in the meeting. I have disclosures to make. I did meet with Alan McKenzie of Mar Ventures and Alex Rose of Continental Development with Commissioner Heschler May 17th for about an hour to discuss the overall site plan.
I also met with Mr. McKenzie with Carol Wingate on Friday, May 17th as well.
And I met with Mar Ventures as well.
All right, does that conclude the staff report?
Yes.
Are there any questions for staff? You can ask them later, because we'll call up the applicant and
Okay.
they'll have their own presentation if you want to do it that way. Okay. Thank you for that. We will now open a public communication. The first right, as always, will go to the applicant. Do we have a presentation?
Thank you, commissioners, for having us present here. And we just have a short presentation. A lot of things have been covered by staff already, but we will run through this and be happy to answer any questions as well after the presentation. Just as a little bit of background, the site that we are working on, the Beach Cities Media Campus, is being framed as part of Continental Park and Rosecrans. And really the Rosecrans corridor has evolved over the last 50 years to be the premier commercial corridor in the South Bay from formerly industrial properties, and this is a continuation of that. It's been over 15 years in the making. When we first started talking with Air Products, the gas plant that was on the site that's now demolished, but I'm sure most all of you remember what that appearance was on Rosecrans as the gateway into El Segundo as you were coming from the west. And it is just going to be a continuation, really, in the larger thought process of Continental Park and the office, retail, dining, and even production facilities that are found on both sides of the Rosecrans corridor right now. The project has been previously discussed. It's a 6.3 acre site, 240,000 square feet of creative office, 66,000 square feet of studio, 7,000 square feet of retail. Staff has already gone through this, but one thing we wanted to point out was we've looked at all these different alternatives for the project, so that way we could respond quickly to the market and really some of the different innovative kind of companies that are coming down to El Segundo. I mean, it ranges from media types, where there is the need for the production facilities to large, medical technology. All kinds of different industries are really looking at El Segundo and looking at for it to be home and new facilities. And that's why we studied these different alternatives. And all of the alternatives have roughly the same amount of impact on traffic, and so they're sized appropriately. So regardless of what the alternative is, one won't create any more of a traffic impact than the other.
So you are reserving the right to implement any one of these alternatives depending on the market?
So long as it's consistent with what is studied and ultimately certified by the council in its certification of the EIR.
Right, so all these were studied in the EIR, and depending on the market, we may look at one alternative over the other.
But when you choose your alternative, it'll come back for a design review to this commission, correct?
That's correct.
It would come back under the site plan review.
Yeah, site plan review.
Okay.
One of the main purposes here is to provide a new state-of-the-art facility to the Rosecrans corridor. So there's been a lot of redevelopment going on in El Segundo, a lot of great projects, adapting of new buildings. Adapting of previous buildings, former industrial buildings. There's a couple new projects going up as well, but this will be the first one on the Rosecrans corridor in quite some time, and we feel that there's a real desire to have brand-new, state-of-the-art product in that corridor in El Segundo.
Could I interrupt real quick?
Sure.
Go to the previous
Sure.
screen. And when we met with, we got a nice little packet when we met with Mr. McKenzie, and one of the alternatives is missing on there, and is there a reason for that?
So the reason is in the way the EIR studied, there's the proposed project. Alternative 1 is no project. Alternative 2 is a reduced project, which is in fact one of the projects, but it's not our preferred choice as far as which ones that we would move forward with. So that's why we didn't put it here, because these are the alternatives that were most likely going to be the ones that we would pursue.
Would also note, Commissioner, that the reduced project is actually financially infeasible, so it effectively is a no project. In other words,
I
could
see.
not.
Doesn't pencil out for you to
It
go ahead
doesn't
and
pencil
develop
out,
and.
But it
okay.
was one of the projects that is in the EIR called Alternative 2 and is
And
based on this study. So as far as the purpose, I talked about this already a little bit, but, provide more a newly constructed product that's different from the repositioned product. We will be building this on a speculative basis, so we've had, some good even preliminary interest already at this stage, but regardless, we plan to pursue and build the project. They called it the build it and they will come kind of philosophy. And then specifically, this EIR will be extending the MU South General Plan and Zoning Designation West, which is similar to what it would be in Continental Park, although we are imposing some limitations on ourselves that are a little bit different than what would be permitted under Mixed Use South. So we're limiting the FAR to 1.13 versus 1.3, which is in Mixed Use South, and also limiting the height to 140 feet versus 175 feet.
So the way it's zoned now, you can actually build more building than what you're proposing with these changes.
If
The way it
the
would,
MU South was approved, that's the correct
yeah,
statement.
the Continental Park zoning to the east, which is what we're going to be zoning to, would permit more building and more height, but we're bringing that down a little bit.
Okay.
If you are building it on spec, how do you know the market can sustain this sort of square footage in a space like this?
I mean, that's, a decision and a question that we're constantly asking ourselves when we're developing projects, so we believe right now that it can, and, for at least, foreseeable duration in the immediate future that it can. So once you make the decision to start building it, that decision's been made, and right now we're comfortable with it. But also, and Alex could speak to it, Mar Ventures and Continental tend to have a longer-term view of the marketplace in El Segundo.
Yeah, Commissioner, the two things I would point out is that over its 50-year period, Continental Park was essentially built spec. So we have been doing that since the beginning of the company, and is sort of our business model, and the decision, as Lionel said, was made early on to continue that business model and get basically the corridor completed, or at least the frontage completed. We obviously have the landlocked parcel to go. The other thing that we know is that with the type of product that we are envisioning, at least on the office side, it's very compatible functionally and user attraction-wise with what we have in the balance of Continental Park. And that product right now is about 95% occupied. So a typical development trigger tends to be in a 10% vacancy, but the Rosecrans corridor, because of all of its location, because of the premium amenities that are offered on both sides of the street, has always maintained the highest occupancy within the city. So we feel, along with our marketing team, pretty comfortable that by the time that we would deliver product, there will be no shortage of demand for it, if it's not all gone long before we actually are able to open the front door.
And then we just wanted to touch on traffic and the impacts a little bit, just to kind of further clarify the issues here with the traffic, so the commissioners can understand fully. So in the future plus project condition, which is at the time point that the project is finished and completed, we'll have two unmitigatable intersection impacts after that project completion. And those two are at Aviation and Rosecrans during both the AM peak traffic period and the PM peak traffic period, and Hindley and Rosecrans just during the AM period. And at Aviation and Rosecrans, the level of service at the time that the project is complete would be D without the project, and with the project, it would also be a D, but there'd be about a 5% increase in the morning and 2.5% increase in the PM period. At Hindley and Rosecrans, it would also go from a level of service D to a level of service D, again with about a 2.5% increase. We do have some intersection mitigations. There are three of them that we would be mitigating with physical improvements, like actual street improvements. Douglas Street and Park Place, changing the stop sign to a signal. Isis and Rosecrans is restriping some southbound to a through left to a left only. And 405 in Rosecrans, which is the off-ramp, northbound off-ramps, some restriping in which Caltrans also has already expressed support for.
So the Douglas and Park Place signal, which is just south of the metro stop, as you
Yeah.
come underneath the thing.
Right.
That'd be the first signal in that whole area off of Rosecrans, right?
I
Yes.
believe that's correct, yeah. And
Coming northbound, that would be correct.
Right.
Right.
So is that signal critical to this plan? Is that what this mitigation means?
this mitigation means that in order to make it so that intersection is not impacted, that would be the improvement that would need to be done. If the signal was not put in for whatever reason, then that intersection would go into the unmitigatable section, and then there would be, the statement of overriding considerations would consider that signal as well.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Trigger is the distribution of traffic, so there would be, be an increase in traffic coming, trips coming from the north as well as from the south. So that's, how you deal with pieces that would come through Park and Douglas if they're coming to the project from the north.
And then this is the site plan you've already seen for the proposed media campus. We're available, to answer any questions, and also wanted to have Lisa, did you want to speak also on the letter?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Can you go back one slide, please?
Absolutely.
The retail seems to be hidden behind the buildings. Are you,
The idea there, and we're still very much in preliminary design phase on this project, but it's about 7,000 square feet of retail. It's not a lot, but that it's kind of serving this office park, also Continental, and that there ultimately will be a connection between the ArcLight Theater area and that retail. You'll be able to so it feels more like one project, walked all the way through and then connect through to the point. So it's kind of on the way in the path inside between the retail that's, between the arc light and the existing office in Continental Park and the retail at the point. It'll be part of that traverse.
So you're
But it could
expecting,
change. It could be
you're
on the
expecting a
fringe.
fair amount of traffic to come through that way then?
Pedestrian
Pedestrian,
traffic,
right.
yeah.
So if the property is gated for security, how does that affect that whole
It
pedestrian?
would
thoroughfare?
probably, if it's gated for security, it would probably would affect like maybe what we do with the retail, depending on the user. And really the gating for security would be if there is more of a media campus that really needs to have, have a little bit more of a secure perimeter.
Right. One of the things I'm most interested in this whole project is that pedestrian pass-through from the point
Yep,
and, takes you all the way through the theaters. I think that's really nice.
Yeah.
If you parked at the point and you had to get back in your car to drive around, I think that's a fail.
yep.
And so what, of your different options, of your different versions, which of those would eliminate that pedestrian walkthrough?
I think, Alex will speak to it, but I think none of them. It's really it's our desire and Continental's desire to really form a strong connection between the point and Continental Park and have that be a amenity. I mean, we think that it's really accretive to the project and to the amenities to be able to have people come out of the project into a nice plaza area and be able to walk to the point and also walk the other direction to the retail and theater courtyard.
Yeah, I agree.
Are there bike trails or, a way that people could ride scooters if scooters became popular in that area?
Certainly could be accommodated. I know the city has a bike lane plan that we have dedicated or have an irrevocable offer to dedicate at our Apollo Landing project. It would be part of this project as well. So, you get that piece along the Rosecrans frontage. Going back almost over the entire 15 years that we've been planning this off and on, as Lionel described and as you asked, Commissioner, there has always been the objective of connecting the point all the way back to the theaters and making that a continuous spine in a pedestrian way and an activated way, a non-vehicular way. That is still the objective. The EIR included the study of the secured perimeter in the event that we had a user that just absolutely insisted on that. It's not our preference, but on the other hand, if that's what that was where the market took the project, at least we were in the position to say that we could accommodate that secure use. And then, as Lionel indicated, try and figure out a way to not give up the retail. This retail in this site plan probably contemplates more of an internal use to those people. But as I said, our objective, even if it is a secure perimeter, is to somehow make sure we maintain and enhance that connection from ArcLight to the point.
When you say retail, are you including restaurant?
Correct. It would be food service.
Thank you.
That type, mostly food service would be the
That
anticipation.
makes sense.
And quick question too, if you could go back one more slide. Sure. In our little packet, there was a discussion to have an additional intersection or signal on Rosecrans.
Yes, so let me just go to the site plan here. So there's a signal being proposed right at the project driveway on Rosecrans, where it's kind of like a little signal Lego
Icon.
diagram there, icon. And that signal is located midway between Nash and Village Drive currently right now. And it would be synced with all the other, with Nash and Village Drive, all the signals on Rosecrans. So they'd all be, synchronized to.
So from Sepulveda, that would be the third. Sorry, I'm old school. From Pacific Coast Highway. East,
Probably not for long.
eastbound on Rosecrans, that would be the third signal. Second signal. Village is the
Yeah,
first,
First
and then this would be the second,
Yeah,
and Nash would be the third. Okay.
and it would potentially align, with a property on, over in Manhattan Beach across the street. In this case, the Connect property across the street.
So, quick clarification, I couldn't find it, but it seemed to me that in the agenda packet, it said there were going to be no signals on Rosecrans. I thought I read that somewhere. I could be very wrong about that, but I could have sworn I read that yesterday. But there's clearly a signal in the plan here.
Yes.
Also, we were here a couple weeks ago and discussed the north-south connector that becomes the roundabout.
That's right.
And so how does that tie into this?
It ties in as much as we are still allowing for the ability for where that signal is to also ultimately go through and connect to Park Place in the future as well. The Village Drive connector, that would go through potentially to Park Place as well. But this is a little bit, one thing, this is a little bit outside of that street.
So the Village Drive, which was not studied as part of the EIR that the city just certified for the Park Place extension, will actually come, I don't know if we have the aerial, Lionel?
And Village Drive is where that goes into the
Village Drive
point.
is where it goes into the mall.
Right, okay.
Yeah, let me go to the
Yeah, the
first
Manhattan Mall.
slide there. There we go.
Yeah, and the point.
Village Drive
Yeah.
is here,
Yep.
and when the rail lines are moved, that's when we would come to the city with a new entitlement application for that property, and part of that development would be the extension of Village Drive into the roundabout.
Gotcha, okay.
There we go.
Other questions?
No, but Lionel, before you introduce, I think it's
Yeah.
Lisa, can you introduce the other consultants or let us know the other consultants who are here?
Yes, who is here? We have Farron Pierce here as well as Ecotero, right? Who's their consultant, yes, and I think that's all we have, yeah.
Okay.
From our side. Farron Pierce is the traffic consultant.
Right. All right.
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. I'm Lisa Kranitz, and I'm Land Use Counsel and assist in the entitlements for this project. I just want to thank you for going forward tonight with this hearing, despite the late letter by Lazu Drury, I think. I'll just call it the LD law firm. It is, in fact, the modus operandi of this law firm to do what's referred to in legal terms as a document dump, of sending in information at the last minute in order to continue, ask a planning commission, city council to continue the items. This law firm very early on, I think it was the scoping process, wrote a letter on behalf of a union. This is what they do. I did a legal case text search by law firm name. Since 2015, they have over 800 appellate cases going throughout the state of California. It's what they do. They come in, they try and get project labor agreements, maybe a few environmental concessions to show they're really concerned about the environment, but the real purpose is basically delay. So we thank you for going forward tonight.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant?
I don't know if it's an applicant question or a traffic consultant question, but the alternative to that's essentially no project because it reduces square footage, is that what it would take to see any kind of movement in the traffic the impacts that cannot be mitigated? So for instance, for Aviation and Rosecrans to no longer have a unmitigable impact, is that kind of the threshold?
All right, so your question is, if alternative two happened, which was financially not feasible for us, would it make the unmitigatable impacts reduced?
Right. Or another way to ask it, is there a financially feasible project that reduces that impact?
For, the short answer from us is that there is not, and we tried to mitigate, we tried already from the beginning to reduce the unmitigatable intersections to as little as possible as we could, and that's where we stood, but I'll let Lisa.
Just turning to your summary of alternatives, which is page 6-138 of the draft EIR, it shows that Project 2 still has significant operational traffic impacts. There wasn't actually traffic calculations run by Fair and Piers on that. As Lionel and Alex indicated, that was an alternative that the EIR consultant put in to determine, to come up with still another alternative. It was not one that's included in the development agreement that was submitted, or that we had originally suggested and that we had run the traffic numbers on. But according to the environmental consultant, you still have significant impacts on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions to the applicant? Anyone else wishing to address the commission on this item? All right, seeing no one, I will close public communication. Further comments shall come from the dais. Any comments to begin?
I wish someone from Lozau Drury were here, actually.
There isn't anybody, huh?
Well, let me start then.
Sure.
I'm
So-
okay with the comments and the rebuttal comments based on the letter. I find the only thing that I read in the letter that actually made sense was to have more than one electric vehicle charger, and I think that that's a reasonable consideration. I didn't find, and of course the soils and all of that, the emissions, everything's been mitigated so far as I can tell based on the letter that we've received. So I was,
Right, and to be clear, after we received the letter, the consultant did respond to the letter, and that's why we took the break to review that. And I believe the summary we were provided does a very good job of refuting pretty much everything that is claimed in the letter. And one of the claims in the letter is about indoor air quality due to formaldehydes from building materials, which is, I'll give credit for originality. That's something I have not come across in any environmental impact report I've seen in over 10 years of reviewing these. But let me quickly address the letter and then table that discussion for later so we can get down to the ERR. So I was curious when this letter came across, and the letter that was sent to me from this law firm says, I am writing on behalf of Supporters Alliance for Environmental Responsibility, which, quote, is SAFER, regarding the final environmental impact report. So I Googled this environmental group, and they don't have a presence on the website. No. So I went to the Secretary of State and found the Articles of Incorporation and learned that this group was formed on January 22nd, 2019.
Just now. Yep.
Right. And then I looked up the attorney who incorporated it. His name is Alexander Chitvin, and he is an attorney who represents unions and multi-employer pension funds. And then I pulled from the Secretary of State again the agent of service of process for the Supporters Alliance for Environmental Responsibility. And the address is in Santa Ana Avenue in El Monte. The president and CEO is John Percadero, and the secretary and CFO is Ernesto Ordonez. So I Googled those two. And wouldn't you know that Mr. Percadero and Mr. Ordonez, one is the business manager, the other is the secretary treasurer for the Labor International Union of North America, representing Local 300 in Los Angeles. So then I Googled some more. And the El Segundo Times, as I call it, the Los Angeles Times, has an article about a developer who has filed a lawsuit in federal court against this exact same union for what they described as green mail, to where they protest, and in this case, it was a high-density housing where they were replacing like a defunct Montgomery Wars and trying to build some houses. They protested the Planning Commission, they appealed at the city council level, and then they filed a lawsuit to stop the development. Eventually it went through, but the contractor, the developer, sued the Labor International Union of North America and 3 individuals who work for the following causes of action: attempted monopolization in violation of Section 2 of the Sherman Act, conspiracy to monopolize in violation of Section 2 of the Sherman Act, directing a, quote, group boycott in violation of the Section 1 of the Sherman Act, conspiracy and attempt to enter into exclusive dealing arrangements in violation of Section 3 of the Clayton Act, violation of labor management relations, racketeering, influence, and corrupt organizations, which is RICO, and unfair competition under 17200. And when I'll just read a couple of allegations from this public document, and this is the Icon at Panorama LLC versus several different unions, including the one that founded this SAFER committee that was represented to us, the basis of this letter. And they're basically being accused of exploiting the secret process itself, not for any reason related to the environment, but for their own financial gain, and as a weapon to coerce the developer and other developers to use nothing but union labor on major developments in Los Angeles County. Let's see. It says that the Department of Planning stated that from the experience in the major project units, the law firm of Lucera Dury, the Southern Carpenters Union, and or Luina, which is the union we're talking about here, submit comment letters, electronically or written comments on nearly every single recent environmental impact report that our unit processes, and that they virtually use the same template. So, I received this letter representing to me that this law firm was lobbying on behalf of the Supporters Alliance for Environmental Responsibility. It's a shame they didn't show up. I would have some questions for them. But from what I have just seen and the fact that Lisa has just told us this same firm contacted you before this letter was sent on behalf of a union, correct? Okay, so this firm previously sent questions about this environmental impact report telling you they represented unions, and then we get this one telling us they represent this 5-month-old environmental nonprofit organization. Okay? All right, the agenda clearly states, under public communications, individuals who receive value of $50 or more to communicate to the Planning Commission on another's behalf, and employees speaking on behalf of their employers must so identify themselves before addressing the Commission. Failure to do so is a misdemeanor. City Code 1-8.4 about city lobbying says any person or organization which is employed or otherwise receives $50 in whatever form must reveal that to the Planning Commission, and if not, it's a misdemeanor, which is, according to 1.2.1, person convicted of a misdemeanor, the penalty is fine not to exceed $1,000 or imprisonment of not more than 6 months. So I am disturbed that this law firm has misrepresented to this commission and to me personally who they represent in trying to raise these defenses. And now that I have taken the time to read the rebuttal arguments, I agree that it is a frivolous action, but I'm also concerned that someone has committed a misdemeanor in front of this commission. And if we as a commission don't do something about it, then why do we have these laws? All right, so I want to table that discussion because I want to ask Mr. King if I need to agendize this, because a part and parcel from this project, which I'll talk about, I'm going to ask for a motion for this commission to make either a recommendation to the city attorney or to city council to summarize what I've just distilled here, which are public records and public documents, to take to the district attorney's office or our police department to see about filing a charge on misdemeanor and or possibly both, reporting this law firm to the state bar. Because I think what I've uncovered here is egregious and unacceptable. I'm not going to have unions or anyone misrepresent who they are in an attempt to strong arm any applicant in this city.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, let me address that very quickly. So, what I would strongly recommend is that the commission not take a formal action, and the reason I say that is that our office, as the city prosecutor's office, would handle any violations of the municipal code. As appointed officials, it would be improper for you to be involved in any prosecution effort by the city. Prosecutors have to have discretion, and prosecutors are not subject to direction from elected or appointed officials. So our office is aware of the municipal code. I have taken notes. I'm aware of the letter that came in, and our office will look into it. And if we feel that there has been a violation of the municipal code, we will address it as the city prosecutor's office. I also take this very seriously. I'm aware of this firm. I'm aware of this practice. The reality is that it is not uncommon for people to sometimes abuse legal processes for illegitimate purposes. And unfortunately, it's difficult for the law to sift out people who have legitimate reasons for engaging in a legal process and those who don't. So
I appreciate that. My comments were more to put it a part of the record and to notify the city attorney. I also discovered 86 times where the same law firm has filed ERR challenges on behalf of the same union. And so what I will do is I will work with you to give you all the information I have. And if you need any other help from me, I'm more than happy to oblige.
Absolutely.
And thank you for your comments. Now to move on to the substantive nature of what we're dealing with here. We're changing a dilapidated industrial wasteland into a modern office building, creative office building. And based on the experience I've had with both Continental Development and Mar Ventures, their product has always been exceptional. I have taken the time to read the environmental impacts. I took the time to look at these objections and the responses. I am satisfied with the mitigating measures. And I'm normally, when it comes to development agreement, I play the heavy up here. But I do appreciate that you're actually trying to not overbuild the project to the extremes that you could, but also trying to design something that is going to get well received in the market, because our job here is to plan for the city to do the best use of the land that we can. And for those reasons, I support this project, and I would, if time came to, be in favor of approving. Any other comments? I'm sorry.
I echo what you say, and I want to express my appreciation, I'm sure the appreciation of the rest of the commission, for all the work that you've done on this and bringing all of this action to light. Thank you very much. I was very pleased when I read the environmental report to see that all of the soil that might have been contaminated from the previous use has been removed. So I thought the environmental report was quite thorough, and I'm with you. I think this would be a good project for El Segundo.
I just had a couple of quick questions. My only concern about the project at all is traffic. And I think that the level of service and the traffic report that has been presented is with traffic in its existing form. Once the signals go in, once the streets get continued through, I think that's going to alleviate, it would be my hope, that it would alleviate some of that potential traffic in that area. But traffic's a really big deal. There's no question about it. It just happens to be where we live. I have a quick question, and I don't know if this is for staff or for the applicant, but the permitted uses, I see here that uses that would become permitted by proposed changes with the CUP, one would be massage establishment. But yet, under uses that become prohibited, that are not allowed, is a day spa. And I just had a quick question about that.
I can't speak to the day spa. I can tell you that right now, massage is also permitted in the C4 zone, so that's an error. It's not yet up in the code, but I worked with federal, and it came before you for a zoning amendment, and it was approved by the council to allow massage in the C4, the Point and Plaza, by a CUP as well. I'm not sure.
All
where
right.
I'll let David
Yeah, that's-
address the day spa issue versus massage.
Oh.
Go on, David.
I wasn't volunteering for the day spa issue. Sorry. I was just going to concur with Lisa that, yeah, the massage, I'm aware of the ordinance that came before. Gina, do you have a?
So Point is C4, and this new will become MUS? Correct. Okay, because we did talk about massage at the Point,
Yeah.
which is, of course, C4, so, okay.
Is there a need? Would there be, is that, I mean, it's just, you cannot have a day spa, but yet, I mean, I don't know.
I,
Not permitted day spas.
We certainly don't have a need for massage use if that's something that you're inquiring about, putting into a list of prohibited uses, if I'm understanding.
Nor a day spa.
Yeah, I haven't thought at all about a day spa, but if you got a real nice, Burke Williams or something, I don't know. That's massage. That's massage, right, okay. Then, no.
Yeah, well,
So then
know
you're,
what a
yeah,
day
I
spa
guess,
It's included.
yeah. And microbrewery, not an option for you in in that restaurant area, that retail sector back there, should that be something that you would choose? No microbrewery.
I don't think it's restricted
Prohibited.
Yeah, that is
It's
prohibited on that
prohibited.
list.
Prohibited or permitted only
with the CUP.
Prohibited.
Vice Chair Newman, what are you reading? I'm
Uh,
sorry.
here.
Page,
No, I'm sorry. What is that? I'm
page
sorry.
9,
I'm on table 1, comparison of permitted uses.
Okay.
page 9 of the report, staff report.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
Is microbrewery classified different than a restaurant or a bar?
Yes. I think
Yeah.
it's actual production.
There's a
of
different
the
liquor
beer.
license.
That might,
The likelihood is that it would not be there, so
Okay.
if it's the commission's desire to have that as a prohibited use, it's not a problem for us.
likewise, if it's your desire to add it as a permitted use, that would be fine for us too.
Yeah, I think
Like, and maybe just, with the same correction for the multimedia offices that was presented.
Yeah, we have
earlier.
that. The multimedia is
Yeah.
part
Is-
of the addendum that we're going to change. 'cause
become permitted,
That's
yeah.
why we're here, really.
But I think it's a astute point that microbrewery may be something that could potentially be advantageous to, a restaurant use or something like that. Oh, never mind then.
Nothing that needs to be worried about or discussed further for this evening? Okay, no problems.
Out of curiosity, while we're on the land use topic, production facilities, it says indoor only. Is there some reason why you would want to exclude outdoor production?
Number one, the outdoor productions tend to take on a bigger footprint and have a bigger impact on surrounding uses, whether it's screening or lights at night or other sound mitigation. And I seem to recall, I may be incorrect, but again, go back to the sort of the threshold is that we're not trying to expand anything that is permitted in the MU South. If it's not permitted in the MU South, we are not trying to get it into this piece of property, and in fact, going the opposite direction and limiting things that we felt just would not likely take place there anyway.
Is there any outdoor production at Manhattan Beach
Yes, there
Studios?
is.
There is?
There
Okay.
is, but they also have the footprint and the physical plant to accommodate it, This would not.
Gotcha.
Right, and the outdoor production facility is like a permanent outdoor facility, like, you know, a street or something of that nature. You could still get a, you know, if someone wanted to film for a few days or whatever, that wouldn't be what that use is. So we wouldn't have a permanent outdoor set as it was.
So speaking of Manhattan Beach Studios, they call their place Manhattan Beach Studios. Was El Segundo Media Campus taken, that name? You don't have to
I'll
answer
leave it to
that.
them.
Always try.
It is the El Segundo Times, but now.
Yeah, El Segundo Times. Prestigious.
Say working title.
Thank you, sir. Good answer.
Any other questions or comments from the dais?
Yeah, my biggest concern was remediation, you know, that brownfield was there for a long time. I love the idea of a new, better use of the property, and so I too read the environmental report, and it seems if the remediation was done properly, I feel better about that.
All right, if we have no further comments or questions, I will accept a motion, and we're going to do 3 things here. Or 4, I'm sorry. All right, I got
A quick question, though, for you, Michelle. How do you feel? Are you...
I'm good. I think I align with you that my biggest questions were about traffic, not as much remediation. So I think everybody focuses on a different thing. And obviously well, maybe not obviously, but the net benefits of the project. I just wanted to hear that there was no kind of alternative that created a zero-sum issue.
I don't think you can take a dirt lot and build anything and not have traffic.
Most definitely,
Yeah.
but those were just the 2 areas not able to be mitigated.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that we approve the environmental assessment number EA-1201 and recommend that the city council amend the general plan zoning of the site. And that's resolution 2861.
As amended by staff.
As amended by staff.
Okay. And then we have I'll make a motion to approve the development agreement.
Yes, that's part of the resolution.
Okay.
Right.
So
So
we're
the
good.
Then I'll
for-
second.
Yeah, just for the record, the resolution recommends approval of the general plan amendment, specific plan amendment, DA, and the certifying the environmental impact report.
All right. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, 5-0. Thank you, everyone, for your time and patience on that. And find my agenda. All right, our next item, continued business, none. That brings us to Agenda J. We're going to hear a study session report from our subcommittee on high density in the R3 zone of El Segundo.
Did Drury send a letter for this to you? Just in case I need to look for that.
They will.
Okay, yeah, right.
Good evening, Chair Baldino and fellow commissioners. We're here to present to you the R3 subcommittee reports regarding a residential neighborhood near Pacific Coast Highway. A little background first. On February 19th, the City Council directed staff to work with you, the Planning Commission, to study potentially increasing the density in this particular neighborhood. I will go into the description of the neighborhood itself in a little bit. The Planning Commission appointed 2 of its members to work with staff, Commissioners Wingate and Commissioner Kildorf. And the commissioners worked with us staff, met 6 times, and they helped staff tremendously with doing research. They've provided expert knowledge on the community and the various topics covered in this report. So I'd like to thank the commissioners for assisting staff with this report. Going on to the agenda for this particular report, these are the topics that we'll be covering in our presentation today. I'll try to go through these as fast as possible for you. There's a lot of material here in the report itself, so feel free to let me know if you have questions along the way. So this is a list of topics that we'll be covering. And we'll start right away with project description and the description of the study area. So as mentioned, the city council directed us to study increasing the density limits in this area. So that means the number of units permitted per acre on a piece of property or on land. The study area is bordered by Sycamore Avenue to the north and Holly Avenue to the south. It's just west of Pacific Coast Highway and just east of Washington Street and Linear Park in the neighborhood. The area is roughly 18 acres in size. There are 74 individual parcels and 577 existing residential units. A little word about the, actually the next few slides I should tell you will cover existing conditions citywide and in the study area, some history and demographics in order to demonstrate whether there is indeed a need for more housing in the city. This particular slide shows the entire residential quarter of the city, west of Pacific Coast Highway. And in the city, in this part of the city, there are 9 different zones that actually permit residential uses. Some of them are residential zones and some of them are commercial that happen to allow some residential uses as well. The densities in these different zones range from 1 unit per lot in our single-family residential zone, which is the yellow color there, and up to 27 units per acre in our R3 zone, which is the darker brown color. Now, based on the permitted density in each of these zones, over 7,300 units are permitted according to the current density allowances in the city. The existing number of units in the city is just a little bit under that. So there's just a little bit of sort of capacity left to add units in the city on an aggregate level.
Not including ADUs.
Not including ADUs, yes. So this is today, but what are the permitted densities and what were they when all these units were built, right? So that's the next slide. So we go into a little bit of the history of the R3 zone. When the city first adopted zoning regulations in 1947, the density and height limits were very high, and the parking requirements were low, so as you can see. That started to change in 1960 when the density allowance was actually halved from 87 units per acre to 43 units per acre. And the height limits were significantly reduced as well. The trend towards restricting density and development continued until very recently. Our code today allows for a maximum of 27 units per acre, 2 stories or up to 32 feet in height in certain situations, and as you can see, much more parking than originally envisioned. So that covers some of the history of the R3 zone. In your packet, there is an attachment, an exhibit that has the complete history going from 1947 all the way through to today. That kind of shows you how along the way things changed.
Was anything ever built to that height in 1947 and beyond?
I don't believe, well, some buildings may be gone now.
Yeah, well, that's
but I don't believe we have buildings of that height in the city right now, no. So moving on a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about our population. From 1940 to 1960, that 20-year period, during and after the Second World War, the population boomed. So within 20 years, the population nearly quadrupled in the city. After that, after 1960 and in the 1960s, the growth started to slow down, and in fact, in the 1970s, population actually decreased a little bit during that decade. And then growth kind of resumed after that, but at a lower rate. And as you can see, in the last 17 years, which is approximately 20 years to compare with the 40s and the 50s, our population increased by about 5%. But one thing that is kind of interesting to see is that that year, 1960, is kind of present in both tables that I showed you. So in 1960, going into the zoning history, the density allowed was actually cut in half. And in 1960 is when our population growth started to slow down. So there's some sort of a relationship or an association, not necessarily causal, but the two things tended to happen at the same time. As density requirements went down, so did population growth. So in this slide, I will briefly go over some of the issues and factors that affect housing need in the city. With regard to the population, as I said, the growth rate has slowed, but the population continues to grow today. And if we project forward to 1920, if those rates, that population growth rate continues, which is around 3.4% right now for the current decade, between 2010 and 2020, we would expect about 564 new residents, or an increase of 564 people, which equates to about 222 units. However, housing production is not keeping up with that growth or the anticipated growth. From 2010 to today, approximately 147 units were permitted in the city. 58 of those were for the Imperial School District site. So if we were actually to catch up with our anticipated growth in population, the city would have to permit around 75 units in 2019. So we're a little bit behind the population growth when it comes to actually producing units in the city.
And because we're landlocked, the only way you can do that is with multifamily, right?
Yes, it's hard to create more land, you're right. Yeah. So a couple other factors that we considered is our population demographics. So our population is aging. Residents over 55 are today nearly 25% of our population. 2 decades ago, they were about 17%. So we're seeing a trend there. Our population is starting to change, and so do the housing needs for the community. With regard to the affordability of housing, things have changed as well as you obviously all know and notice every day. Single-family homes have gone up approximately 50% since 2013. Rental rates have gone up substantially. Sales of condominium units have gone up substantially. Their prices have gone up substantially. And incomes have not necessarily kept up with those increases in prices. So affordability is an issue. Homes here in El Segundo are becoming less and less affordable to its residents. One interesting statistic that I found in our research was the housing stock age here in the city. So 81% of the homes, the units in the city are 30 years or older. It kind of begs the question, what is the reason for that? And we'll get into that in a little bit later in the presentation.
But Paul, that would include like remodels people have done, or you're just talking about
No.
brand new,
Yes.
ground up construction? Okay.
Yes, the original construction date, yes. The housing age is an indicator, albeit indirect in some cases, of the condition of a building. The older the building, the more problems there might be. Older buildings don't meet current building code requirements, fire code requirements, current safety requirements. So there are reasons why replacing and having a newer housing stock makes sense. Unit overcrowding, although much lower than LA County, and not necessarily a problem today, has been ticking up in the last couple of decades in El Segundo. So,
How'd you learn that? From census?
yeah, we looked at a lot of census data and the Federal Department on Housing and Urban Development. Yeah. And all that information is attachments and exhibits to your
Oh, I
report.
saw.
Great. So
My
that
hard drive space
is
isn't
not
big enough.
necessarily a problem today, but if current trends continue, if there's no change in policy, that may become an issue in the future. Also, another factor affecting need in the city is arena numbers and other state legislation. Currently, the city is behind in its arena allocation. There are a couple more years in this current housing cycle, but we are a little bit behind what we were hoping to
And
produce.
Paul, remind us what RENA stands for?
Regional Housing Needs Assessment. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the need for housing. So we wanted to look at, well, what is the capacity in the city and in our study area in general? So this table shows the citywide capacity to add residential units, broken down by zone, the 9 zones that I mentioned earlier in the report. Some of these numbers may attract your attention, such as the total number at the bottom, which I shared with you earlier. The numbers for Smoky Hollow and for the downtown area, where there appears to be a lot of capacity for more units, although that is theoretical capacity. In practice, really the capacity is much, much lower. And the other number that grabs attention is really in the R3 zone. So in the R3 zone, we actually have a negative capacity, meaning we have built around 600 units more than what our current density permits.
Because of the previous density
Because
numbers.
of that history of the density back in the 1940s and 50s, yes. A lot of,
So if I owned an R3 that was over capacity for the zone, I would not be able to tear that down and rebuild what I had. I would have to comply with the new code.
that's correct. And that kind of explains why our housing stock is not renewing. Because not no one, but you're rarely going to see somebody building, demolishing, let's say 10 units to build 6.
Right, and you'll need parking for 20 cars, probably.
Yes, that's right.
And then when you talk about Smoky Hollow, those are the granny flats.
Yes,
talking about-
Smoky
Caretaker.
Hollow,
Yeah,
yes.
caretaker unit, not
Mhm.
really a family unit or even
Yeah.
not something you would think of as a home, but
Yeah, since you
caretaker
asked that
unit.
question, let me just address it real briefly. So in Smoky Hollow, yes, the code allows for what are called caretaker units. So
Right.
someone who is there on site overnight to take care of the property, to be a security guard or something like that.
right.
When we went through the process to adopt this new Smoky Hollow specific plan, we had our consultants evaluate the potential build-out, in the area, including these caretaker units. And our consultant estimated that maybe 6 units will be built over the 20-year life of this specific plan. So very, very different from what the theoretical capacity is here.
Yeah, because they're 100 square feet or something like that.
Right, not a lot of use for it.
Yeah.
It's not
In
practical.
addition, there are a lot of other limitations that really affect the theoretical capacity shown here and the practical capacity. We're talking about properties that are already developed,
Right.
so it's very hard to demolish or add on to existing properties. We are talking about properties that are usually very small and narrow, so it's very hard to build within standards on those properties. We're talking about the construction costs. So it's very hard to make it work, as Mr. Rose said earlier, it doesn't pencil out, for developers. Something has to happen that's different. So this begs the question, well, where is a good area to add density or to add more units in this city? And we think the study area itself is a good location for that, and we'll go into the reasons in a little bit. But first I wanted to cover the actual capacity in the study area itself. So as I mentioned earlier, the area is about 18 acres in size. According to our current density limits, they could have 485 units, but the area is already developed with 577, over 90 units more than what is permitted overall for that area. In fact, 11 of the 74 parcels that I mentioned earlier are developed at densities over 40 units per acre, because they took advantage of the density a long time ago, probably before 1960. And in fact, also only 2 parcels out of the 74 have a single family residence on them. So that means that there's really not a lot of capacity in the study area under current densities. So again, why is this a good area for additional density? Well, the latest thinking and plan in the planning field calls for having an appropriate mix of uses that are complementary, that are kind of compact, close to each other, walkable, sustainable neighborhoods, with access to alternative modes of transportation, so that you can create sort of a neighborhood village or vibe, so that the neighborhood functions by itself. The study area meets a lot of this criteria. So there is a mix of complementary uses everywhere around this district. So you have Walgreens, you have grocery stores, coffee shops, other neighborhood services, small offices, banks, more restaurants. Just to the south in Smoky Hollow, there's a shared office space building, which is very unique, and it's trendy. So it makes good sense for people to live nearby and just walk right across the street. In addition to that, we have jobs. A lot of jobs within walking or short bike ride away. We have a linear park directly next door offering for recreation opportunities. Right down the street, a couple of blocks away, you have 2 schools. So you have all these different uses right next to this residential pocket that can provide for a lot of different sort of needs for residents. And there's also alternative transportation. There are 2 bus lines that run along PCH that could connect that neighborhood to the Green Line stations, that go to the Green Line stations, connect the city to the South Bay and north of LAX. So that covers kind of why this is a good area. We covered that there is evidence that there is a need for housing in the area. So staff looked into a couple of different alternative sort of development scenarios to consider impacts and benefits. So the first one is kind of like the environmental impact report we just heard about, the no change scenario. So no change is basically existing conditions just continuing longer. So keeping the density the same, keeping all the standards the same. And we talked about a lot of those impacts, such as the housing stock. It will continue to age, and whatever negative impacts are associated with increasing age, will continue. I mentioned compliance with building safety and fire safety requirements, for instance. Overcrowding, I mentioned, although it's not an issue today, if there aren't any changes in policy, that could become a problem to be concerned about. In addition, our housing needs, if you recall, we talked about, and in the report we talked about specific population segments in the city that need different types of housing. Those needs would not be met under the existing or no change scenario. Impacts to traffic and parking would be minimal. Obviously, some units would be added to this neighborhood over time, but those impacts from traffic and parking on the street would be fairly minimal, and the same would go with impacts on city services. So the second scenario that we considered was increasing the density, having higher density. So this gives a couple of examples of higher density. So in the first example, we're looking at potentially increasing the density to 40 units per acre. And the result there would be to actually create some additional capacity, so going above the negative mark. The same would go with increasing the density to 54 units per acre. It would create some additional theoretical capacity, because if you remember, the same kind of restrictions and limits apply to under this scenario as well. There's still existing development on the site. In fact, just the other day when I was driving through the neighborhood, I saw a lot of apartment and condominium complexes. Those are not about to be torn down in the next few years to be rebuilt.
Right, if you got 12 townhomes, someone's not going to tear all those down or rebuild something, but an apartment building perhaps.
So with regard to this higher density scenario, now that I've kind of described it, and there will be benefits and impacts. So benefits with regard to housing stock. As I mentioned, there'll be direct benefits through new construction, and there'll be indirect benefits as property owners who choose not to redevelop their properties will see new development around them. Property values may increase. They'll be incentivized to make their own improvements to their properties, to charge higher rents or sell for higher prices. Overcrowding would be that pressure on the overcrowding rates would be relieved somewhat by the addition of more housing in the area. This second scenario would help address the housing needs that we talked about today and in our report. They would make an impact on prices and affordability in the study area itself through providing a variety of housing types, potentially incentivizing or requiring some affordable units in new development in the area. Also, there'll be benefits to the commercial uses in the area. Today, there's approximately 1,500 residents in the area. By adding more, that will have a kind of a beneficial effect on the commercial unit uses around there. And obviously, that in turn would affect our sales tax revenues here at the city. There will be infrastructure improvements. As new development comes in, they would make improvements to the infrastructure around their sites. Or if the city chooses to do this, they require additional improvements to infrastructure that could be done. Mentioned parking benefit district, whose parking is a concern, and sometimes parking is thought of as a big problem, but if managed through something like a parking benefit district where there's charging for parking on the street and revenues are reinvested in that neighborhood to make improvements in the neighborhood, residents, property owners tend to think of that as a benefit to the district. So kind of changing kind of the way it's viewed, parking is viewed. When it comes to impacts, there will be traffic impacts. Yes, more units will be developed in the area. Although during that process, we would review those impacts and mitigate them through the environmental review process. Parking impacts, there will be parking impacts such as spillover into the neighborhood. There are ways to mitigate that as well through permit parking, a parking benefit district, and things of that sort. There will be impacts to city services, as you know, there'll be more calls, let's say, for service for police and fire, or parks would be used more by new residents. Although the city is actually considering now reviewing its development impact fees to help cover more of the cost of those impacts, and that could be done as part of this process. There would be impacts to existing residents, so the city would have to be sensitive to direct and indirect impacts on the existing residents in this particular area. There may be impacts such as massing from larger developments, because as you know, on small lots it's a little bit hard to build up to a density. So there may be some lot consolidation, some bigger buildings going into the neighborhood. But through design review or design guidelines, there's ways to kind of address that and also make sure that the neighborhood maintains its character. So you have homes and new developments with their doors and front doors facing the street and not behind a big wall, you know. So the neighborhood is connected. So those would be some of the impacts. So with that, our recommendation at the end of this report is that it is worth conducting some further analysis on this issue. We believe that we should conduct perhaps a market analysis to see maybe what the appropriate density would be that would generate redevelopment on those sites. Staff used some examples earlier, the 40 units per acre or 54 units per acre. Those are examples. We have not done an actual market analysis to tell you that that is the density that will trigger redevelopment and improve the area. Some of the local developers that we've talked to have told us that the density would have to go up to maybe a minimum of 40, if not more. But we still need to follow up with an actual study to see what makes sense, what pencils out for developers. And to accompany that, we would have to do a fiscal analysis to see how new development in the area affects the cities. So, for instance, what are the costs associated with providing additional services? And then comparing that to the benefits from increased tax rates and so forth, to see where that adds up, how it all balances. In the end, if the city decides to go forward with increasing density in the area, we would need to amend the general plan to possibly create a new zone or a specific plan for this particular area. And of course, that would come with an environmental assessment as well. That concludes our report. We'll be happy to take questions on this.
Paul, would part of your market analysis or fiscal analysis, would that include kind of doing an inventory of how many of these lots are apartments versus how many are townhomes or condos?
Exactly. I believe that we would have to go nearly parcel by parcel
Right.
to look at which of these parcels have the potential to redevelop.
So I can see if it makes sense if I own an old dilapidated apartment building, if I can get more units, it might pencil out to knock it down. But if it's a townhome with 4 units or 6 units, no one's going to buy out all 4 and redevelop that. So
Correct.
I just don't know if there's enough apartments to make it worthwhile.
Right.
Yeah, it would be predicated too on if somebody owned several units in a row, several lots in a row, that they'd be able to take them all down. But then we have to look at taking care of tenants that might be displaced by this kind of development as well.
When you did your models, did you look at what heights you needed to go up to accommodate that sort of density, those higher densities? Because I'm assuming that's how you get it, is by going up.
Yeah, we did not get to the modeling stage as part of this study. We know that the height limits would have to be revisited, and very likely our parking requirements as well. Because as you know, fitting a lot of parking on these lots is very difficult physically and financially, especially when you have to dig down and create parking structures.
Yeah, they're right on top of each other over there.
Yeah.
So going subterranean is risky
Inexpensive.
and expensive.
Yeah. Affordable housing. What is the city's mandate from the state that we have to, how many units are we supposed to have for our population?
For the current cycle, it's 69 units, and that's broken down into different categories from extremely low, very low, low
Sure.
income, and so forth.
Sure. Well, it seems like doing some sort of rezoning is about the only way to get to that. Is that right?
The evidence here in this report kind of leads to that conclusion, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So you'll give the same presentation to City Council, right?
Yes, and of course, if you have some additional input for us, we can kind of supplement this information with anything that you would like us to include.
I commend you guys and my esteemed colleagues here on the dais for putting together a great bit of information.
Your packet rivaled the environmental impact report for
did.
pages. so
Exactly.
Congratulations on the reading.
That was
Well
not our
done.
intent, thank you.
Paul put a tremendous amount of effort into this, as did Greg and Sam, I'm sure, but your attention to detail was impressive, for sure.
Yeah, it's nice to have this type of history, growth, along with planning. The work you put into it is tremendous, but it also allows us to try to look forward. You know, sitting up here, we usually react to things. It's nice to kind of get a big picture view of how do we get from where we are to where we think we should be or we want to be. And it really takes this type of grinding away to put it in perspective for us. So thank you, Paul.
Well, it's also critical. I mean, as we look at jobs east of PCH, when we look at trying to attract businesses, these businesses, these campuses, they want people to live nearby, and we ain't got no place for these people to live nearby. So it's a challenge. So we do need to figure out housing in this town if we're going to continue to be economically attractive.
Yeah, but there's a balance too.
Of
I mean,
course.
you've got to kind of keep El Segundo Gundo by, no one's going to want high rises, you know, that close to an R1 zone. But there might be some happy medium that we can get to.
I agree. Yep.
As far as input, my only observations are that it looks like this could be the only stretch of land where high density or higher density housing would be feasible. But I'm curious to know how many are apartments versus how many are townhomes. I think if you start chopping up that block area, it may not, even if we rezone it, there may not be enough land there for anyone to really develop it. And I don't know if that's something, I don't think it's as simple as if you zone it, they will build. We may have to look at it parcel by parcel to figure out logistically, does it make sense, or do we have townhomes breaking up all these apartment buildings? Are they owned by multiple entities? I mean, I've been down those cul-de-sacs on Santa Sleighs, and those are some older homes that people are living in.
Yeah, if I may, two things. One is that it depends to a certain extent on the incentives that the city is willing to provide or requirements for types of housing. And also, I want to mention that there may be other areas in the city, and there was an exhibit in your report showing some other areas that have similar characteristics as this area that maybe perhaps in the future deserve some study as well.
Where were those, Paul? I missed that.
It was the last exhibit in your packet.
Oh.
Yeah.
I fell asleep by then. I'm sorry. Just where's the area? You like,
Yeah,
like
sure.
Imperial?
The areas
or?
are downtown
Oh.
because it has the same kind of mix of uses nearby. You have commercial uses,
Sure.
services, parks, transit to a certain extent. The corner of Imperial and Main, where there's a commercial center there, access to Imperial. It already has some medium density residential in the area, pretty close to a high school. There's also what I think is kind of a little gem, in my personal opinion, at the corner of Center and Mariposa, that little shopping center across the street from the school. That's also right there where you have commercial uses, you have schools on either side, parks nearby. So there's some more areas that may be worth looking into.
Has the city been approached by owners or developers who have wanted to do this sort of redev, but have walked away because it's not set up to do that, it's not zoned for enough density to work?
We've had some interest from developers, yeah.
Well, I think further study is warranted. I think this is going in the right direction.
I think,
And again, thank you, Paul. You did a lot of work on this. Thank you.
yeah, I'd also really like to thank Paul. Paul has done the majority of the work, and it was really nice working with Commissioner Keldorf and Commissioner Wingate. It was really nice to have your input. From staff's perspective, we knew there were concerns. We wanted to understand. We wanted to understand the data. We wanted to understand the history. And we wanted to present options to the Planning Commission and the Council. But we didn't want to, we wanted to stop at a certain point because we could have just kept studying. We could have studied for another year, and we could talk about height and talk about density, talk about parking. And we wanted to stop at a certain point and ask council if they wanted us to proceed. And I think we're ready. I also want to point out that I know you've been hearing about what's going on at the state level. There's some scary things coming out at the state level. I know Commissioner Wingate had sent an email about SB 50. SB 50, if it went through, would have allowed 4 units on single-family lots. And you saw our graph. The number of units that we can add in our single-family zones, even, it's like 16 units. There's just no capacity there. So then you go, well, what are the options, right? Some cities allow some commercial areas to be converted to multifamily. And we have a lot of commercial space that if somebody may force us to convert those to residential. And so maybe if we start making some right changes for our city and right density in the right places, maybe we can prevent the state from pushing things on us too much. And I don't know if Paul mentioned, but I think what we're thinking is, our residential zoning is very limited in options. We have R1, R2, and then we have R3. We thought about maybe creating another zone, R4, which with the higher density and the height and parking.
Yep.
And if it works, then we may think about growing that to other places. So, but we thought this location was maybe the first good place to start.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sam. I have zero confidence the state cares what the cities are doing on a local level at this point. And I think it's a sad situation to be in, to put so much effort and planning to what's best for our community, only to have someone who lives 8 hours away
Yeah.
decree how we're going to zone our residential neighborhoods. Yeah, it's sad.
We had a letter of protest ready for the SB 50, but we heard last minute that it's been shelved and it's not going to be reconsidered until 2020. But we look at that and then we turn around, there's 3 more bills that I think we're going to put in and items on the council for the next council meeting of writing a letter of protest. So it's ongoing.
Right.
It's constant.
Constant
So,
battle.
yeah. So I think, trying to get ahead of it, I think might be an option.
Yeah, when it comes to low-income housing or even the whole trash issue, the state sets these mandates and the cities try to comply, and if you don't at least make that effort, you face certain consequences. So it's imperative on us to continue to think about these problems and try to think of solutions that work best for us. So again, I appreciate the effort you guys put into this. It's very helpful. So this is one of those items I think that one of the planning commissioners should volunteer to go speak to city council about. Maybe a subcommittee member. I'm just thinking out loud.
Just riffing.
I don't know.
When
I'm
is the meeting?
When's this going to be presented, Paul?
We haven't scheduled it yet.
Yeah. It's not going to be in June.
Okay.
It'll be in July,
Okay.
and it could be a tag team too.
It could be what?
A tag team between the.
Oh.
Bring a friend.
commission.
Yeah.
I'm happy to
Yeah.
do that with
Yeah,
Carol.
we can do that.
Great.
And a question, when it gets, we're recommending that council study this further. Are there any other parameters on it? What's the,
What's the ask?
yeah.
Well, I think further study, because we stopped at this place to see if the council wants to do further study, because it seems that we're under a lot of pressure from the state. There's 15 more bills up there that are being considered. So if we can talk about what we did and then say we think it needs to be studied some more, because the times they are changing, they're going to come down heavy on us if we don't do something, at least put some good good effort forward.
I think we'll present what we have, and if they direct us to move forward, I think we've already thought of some ideas of doing a door-to-door, see which of them are condominiums and which of them. We'll get more ideas, and as those ideas consolidate to some specific scope of work to get a consultant on board, then at that point we'll probably go back to council and say that we're going to need X dollars to get a consultant on board to study this scope, and it'll progress over time. But this was first, step one.
I wonder if during the study we can't look at impact fees too, and see if those need to be adjusted and how.
Yeah, impact fees certainly, and we're actually going to look at an overall city impact fee, which hasn't been looked at for about 7-8 years. Greg McLean and I are going to ask council for some money to study that. And it kind of goes along with the Public Works to the facility analysis that will be further studied in the strategic plan, and we thought it was timely to do a revised impact fee.
All right. Well, thank everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your hard work on that. I appreciate it. That'll bring us to Planning Commissioner comments. Any comments from the dais?
None
Nope.
for me.
All right. Then we are adjourned. Our next meeting will be here on June 13th at 5:30. Thank you.